Welcome to the Tesla Power Podcast. This is where we're building the Tesla energy community. We're covering solar panels, solar roof, Powerwall for your home. I'm Aaron Brady. And today, let's talk about heat pump, HVAC. Let's talk about Powerwall value for money. Let's talk about Tesla monitoring third-party inverters. Let's talk about changing your order after permits and a lot more. Let's do it. So as per usual, we will kick off the pod with community input. You can participate in several ways. You can leave a comment below. You can link your YouTube videos. You can email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call 203-816-5150. For the bold and ambitious, record an unlisted video question in the YouTube app. Send a link. I'll put your video question in the show. First up, we have Mark Grant. He has ditched his old HVAC for a Bosch heat pump with great results. Let's read it. Quote, "The Bosch power startup is 58 amps compared to 109 amps on the old HVAC. I can see the variable speed consumption difference over the old single speed. Peak is 28 amps on the Bosch and 17 amps on the old system. Reality is it uses about 2.5 to 2.8 amps as the variable speed does its magic on lower speeds. Interesting to note is the system heats and cools fast. Runtime is not as long, and frequency on and off is matched with the variable speed controlling consumption and providing maximum comfort. If it were not for a $2,500 manufacturer rebate and a $2,500 California state rebate, we would have not made the $14,000 big investment. It was another $6,500 for new ducting. So running AC during the hot day is all been driven by solar production so far. Heating in the morning has only impacted the single battery, about 10% of its state of charge. This is what I've noticed in the first month of owning the almost 6.5 kilowatt solar system and one Powerwall," end quote. And really interesting to me that the 5,000 of rebates were needed to push you over the edge. I've been advocating the idea that solar and batteries need to be competitive on the market without incentives. And, you know, I think it should be the same way for HVAC. It needs to be that same way as well. It might be helpful to understand here that the incentive isn't really meant for the end user. It's really meant more for the manufacturer. These incentives allow the manufacturers to charge more money than they might otherwise need to charge to close sales and win market share. The theory here is that it uses demand to pull a new industry forward. You know, it's to help it grow faster than it might naturally grow without the stimulated demand. Now, there's a fundamental economic problem here, and if you increase demand without correspondingly increasing supply, you simply raise prices. You know, it is possible that the increase in demand can stimulate more investment in the industry to meet the increase in demand, but it's going to be a lagging effect at best. At worst, manufacturers simply take higher profits and the product continues at low scale and out of reach of many consumers unless they get incentives from the government, which is something we all pay for anyway. So what I'd prefer to see is for incentives on the supply side that would allow these products to scale. And that would in turn reduce the market price of these products, and consumers can then benefit more directly and more immediately, resulting in a faster move to the better technology. So along with the way we end up, along the way of doing that, we end up with more jobs. We end up with a higher tax base, and that can then in turn pay for these incentives. So ideally, no intervention would be required, but I appreciate that we want, as a society, to accelerate this for the benefit of homeowners, for the benefit of utility, for the benefit of society writ large. I really respect Tesla for this ethos, in fact. They scale manufacturing to reduce the price and increase the availability to customers. That's really the first thing they're after. They don't look to stimulate demand. You know, their ethos is it'll be there if you make a compelling product. Now, Bosch absolutely is a company that makes compelling products. In fact, they supply most of the manufacturers that provide your finished goods. It's crazy. And, they're obviously doing this at scale if they're able to, fill the need essentially market-wide in a wide variety of these product types. The problem for a company the size of Bosch is that they don't move quickly. And they're honestly not working to drive costs down in response to short-term demand. They'll simply take profits in the short term and then continue their conservative growth trajectory. Not only that, they'll be balancing priorities across the business. They can't make this a priority to accelerate the transition. It's just not the way a large company like that is going to be thinking. It's not the way it's going to work internally. Now, Tesla will take profits in the short term, but you got to admit they are hardcore scaling, and they're laser focused on the mission to accelerate the mission. They're laser focused on the mission to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. And as a result, you can expect their HVAC product, when it comes available, to be the best value. They are a premium product, so it's not necessarily going to be at the lowest price, but it will be the best value. And as a result, all of that is a result of their scale and their focus on these missions. Now, you see this today with their solar roof and their battery products. Their solar roof is the best value all in, and the Powerwall is the best value all in. I mean, the problem still remains. The upfront cost is just way too high for most people. Rebate incentives like the one Mark points out in this comment, they can help, but usually the cash still has to be laid out at the time of purchase, and then the incentive is returned later. So that still keeps it out of the reach of a lot of consumers. But it's something I mentioned last time. Financing options can ease this, but it's another layer of complexity, and it will add cost, right? Potentially significant cost if the consumer has poor credit. What might be super interesting is if Tesla offers HVAC as a service. I don't know. Bear with me. They did try this a little bit with solar, and they've since discontinued it. But packaging power and HVAC at a monthly rate might bring, the barrier to entry down enough, and it might be a strong enough business model to accelerate the growth in the beginning of this product cycle and allow conversion to a traditional purchase once production is ramped and costs are driven down, so they can take that energy as a service business model just to accelerate transition. Once those costs come down, then they can move the business model over to just a traditional purchase. Anyway, if there's a software tie-in, I don't know, like maybe virtual power plants, or grid services provided by virtual power plants, that's probably the very best way. That would be even more valuable to Tesla as they scale. And maybe that would mean they wouldn't need to share those profits with the asset owner, right? Because they would own the assets. They are just providing HVAC and energy as a service. That makes Tesla the sole owner. I don't know. It's hard to see this happening. I definitely get that. This idea is complicated by the fact that home ownership would be separate from the HVAC asset and the energy generation asset. That makes selling a home really hard. We saw this problem with power purchase agreements at Solar City, and Tesla phased those things out really quickly after they acquired Solar City in 2016. So maybe we're back to Tesla starting up market with an expensive HVAC, and then iterating with more affordable options as they drive down market. I don't know. It doesn't lend itself to scaling quickly, unfortunately. So I don't know. It's a more sustainable way to build a business for sure. And I guess that might be what we have to settle for. That's what we saw with the car market anyway. But Mark, you really got me thinking here. I went on a huge tangent. Thanks for sharing your experience. The energy savings seems like it would be significant. It'd be interesting to put some numbers on that. So let us know what you can calculate. Just based on what data you've gotten so far. We'd love to get that kind of detail. That'd be pretty sweet. All right, next up, we've got a comment from this one's from Jim Jenkins. He responds to the IQ8 comment from the last show. I just want to make sure I've pulled up his comment here. There we go. That was something that we talked about specifically in episode 57. So let's read that quote. The off-grid IQ8 is sort of cool, but it's pretty misleading. And their 10T batteries are 2 times the cost of Tesla Powerwalls with 50% less energy end quote. And I just mentioned the value Tesla brings with scale and focus. In previous episodes, we've seen how third-party installers that can choose anything on the market to go with, they go with Powerwalls when they can get a hold of them. And, you know, this comparison is just another reason why. You know, competitors, they can't touch the value for money Tesla offers with Powerwalls. And honestly, it's only going to get more pronounced as the world goes through a battery shortage over the next few years. I want to reiterate the importance of pairing batteries with solar. It's energy security for you. It's grid stability for everybody else. If you can afford it, it's for the greater good. Get some batteries with your solar system. It performs better overall anyway, but it's just better for it's better for everybody. All right, next, Rick Reed sets me straight on the install components and the app that I talked about last episode. Let's read it. Quote, "Hey, Aaron, we do use the Tesla app to monitor the system. The gateway is the inside box next to the sub panel. The inverter is on the outside of the house. More to come on your questions," end quote. Okay, so that helps make sense of the system a little bit more, but the SolarEdge unit with the antenna is an inverter? I don't know, it kind of throws me. It's definitely the opposite way that they did the install for my system. They put the inverters inside and the gateway outside. And straight up, I don't understand why they would use a SolarEdge inverter rather than a Tesla inverter. You know, they're using the Tesla gateway. Does that mean there was some kind of component shortage? I don't know. So many questions, right? But here are the photos of my system. So this one shows the gateway on the outside of the house with the main shutoff switch. If you were to open that gateway, you'd see the same switches shown in Rick's system. They do look like a breaker panel, but they're another set of main shutoff switches. They're just less obvious. And then the inverters, these are Tesla inverters. They're the two white boxes on the upper right-hand side. You know, Tesla inverters, in my case, he had SolarEdge inverters. They're on the inside of the same wall. This happens to be in my basement. And you'll notice just below those inverters, I happen to have an extra meter. Now, it's weird, right? Why would I have another meter on the inside? Now, that's my understanding anyway, is that's to track my solar production separately from my net meter. And that net meter is back on the outside here. Anyway, so just quirks of the install process, I guess. And, you know, Tesla will do it one way. Third-party installers will do it another way. But I definitely understand now. This third-party installer used Hanwha panels, SolarEdge inverters, Tesla Gateway, and Tesla Powerwalls. So I love that you are able to monitor everything through the Tesla app, even though it's a third-party inverter. I complain basically every episode about my brother-in-law's SolarEdge interface. It's crap. I mean, it is a public web interface, to be fair. And he probably has a better way to monitor the system, although he doesn't know what it is. So I don't know if that's any better. And this is probably the 69th time I promised he'll be a guest. And one day, I promise I'll deliver one day. But thank you for the update, Rick. Send more detail when you can. Next up, we've got a comment from Mark. Actually, this one is an email. So Mark Grant outlines his Tesla solar panel installation experience. Mostly it was great, but he had some bumps along the way. The first bump was the need for repairs to his roof before they could do the work. And then the second bump, let's read it. Quote, rescheduled installation day, April 17th. Tesla arrived at 8:30 a.m. with PVs and Powerwall. By noon, all electrical was done with new sub panel and Powerwall with all new breakers. And by 2:30, PV's install was completed. That's all in one day. That's pretty impressive. On May 4th, Tesla came out for a service call they had initiated. They needed to split one PV power line, the two array groups, into two inverter ports. So really what had happened, it sounds like, is they tied both strings into a single MPPT, which was a mistake. Back to his email. On the average, I was seeing a peak of 4 kilowatts. It's not actually kilowatt hours. 4 kilowatt hours would be the energy capacity. A peak energy generation would be at 4 kilowatts. So on the average, I was seeing peak of 4 kilowatts to 4.1 kilowatts. After the quick fix, peak production shot up to 5.5 kilowatts. I was told to expect 80% of the 6.38 kilowatt that the system's rated for, which would calculate out to 5.1 kilowatts. The following day, Tesla was out doing their final inspection and put all the required labeling in preparation for the city inspection. In speaking with the technician, the changes I made in the system to increase the size and adding the Powerwall, Tesla's PMs, their project manager, had not kept up on the design changes for city permitting or inspection. Sounds familiar. It's now May 20th, and Tesla has yet to have the city inspection completed. I find it interesting. One would think that Tesla would want to get this completed ASAP, as they don't require payment until the city inspection is completed. End quote. Now, I love that this was essentially a one-day job. I mean, they did need to come back to reconfigure the connection. But if they had gotten that part right originally, this would have been something like a 6-hour job. Definitely a single day install. Totally done end to end. But we have got to talk about changes to Tesla solar orders after permits and applications are pulled. I pinged one of my contacts at Tesla to see if that's been addressed at all. I don't know. Is it even on the radar for Tesla? You know, they move so fast. They break so many things. Maybe they don't even realize like this is like a thing that needs to be considered. I'm just kind of thinking here. It might ultimately be better just to cancel your order and place a new order with the right specs. I mean, it would definitely trigger a new set of permits. Which may even be automatic based on how fast you got your permits approved, like next day, right? I don't know. So, I don't know. If it were me, I probably would have gone through with the original order rather than cancel and reorder just to keep my place in line. I mean, that is one thing. I don't know. It's just so complicated. I don't know. If I'd done that, it would have been a huge tragedy. I don't know. It probably would have resulted in more long-term pain than I ended up experiencing now. So I don't know. It's tough. The level of education required, is pretty high to make the right decision. I'm not even sure I'm making all the best decisions now that I've had the system for a whole year. I don't know. Honestly, I worry that I'm giving bad advice, right? So full disclosure, we're all learning together, including Tesla, right? We all do super dumb things, The best we can hope to do is learn from those super dumb mistakes, Tesla included. I don't know. I hope most of you are able to learn from my mistakes, certainly. Maybe Mark's mistake. Changing your order after getting permits, no bueno. So Mark notes that his system is generating nearly 40 kilowatt hours on a really good day, and that's covering most of his electricity needs. He did change to charging his car during the day so that he can power it directly from the sun rather than through his Powerwall. And he's using his Powerwall to shift demand to take advantage of off-peak rates. So, tons of goodness there, right? Really good. Mark, thank you for sharing. Really helpful for the community. Helpful for me, actually. Very educational. Please give us an idea of what your payback estimate is going to be now that you have some data to extrapolate on. Thank you to Mark Grant, Jim Jenkins, Rick Reed, all of you for your input. Let's hear from the rest of you. Send in your YouTube links. Comment below. Call 203-816-5150. Email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. So many ways to contribute. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we will get into the news. So this episode, we have a full docket of 5 stories to cover. First up, we've got one from the New York Times. They have an article on solar and battery selection. They put this in their wire cutter section. They sum up the residential value in terms of the wider grid. Super interesting. Let's see what they've got to say. They say, quote, way down here in the article. Way down here. To meet the surge in demand, utilities are often forced to fire up peaker plants, which are less efficient than the main fossil fuel plants, but quicker to get up to speed. The result, in some days, is that the utilities' CO2 emissions actually exceed what they would have been were there no solar panels at all, which is berserker. Virtual power plants will help solve the problem. Excess solar power will charge up homeowners' batteries during the day, and then the utilities will draw on it during the evening spike instead of firing up the peaker plants. Battery owners will enter legal agreements with the utilities, granting them the right to do this, and likely will earn a fee for letting their batteries be used, end quote. Now, residential won't be the only source of only source of solar and battery storage, of course, but it's currently the largest. And if we can organize the market with scale and financing, it's likely to stay that way. This article is worth a read. It goes way deep down into the weeds on who benefits and who doesn't benefit. What does come clear from this article, and just experience in general, it's twofold. So the first is that residential solar must include a battery. And the second is that residential solar and battery storage will be the lion's share of new energy capacity in the early stages of the sustainable energy transition. So this is coupled with the residential transportation being the leading edge of the transition to sustainable energy consumption. You don't see businesses doing this first. You see consumers doing this first. And that can potentially be tripled with residential heating joining the leading edge of the transition to sustainable energy consumption. Yet to be seen. We'll see. We're at the very, very earliest stages of this transition, though. So we'll look back in like 50 years. We'll realize that this, honestly, is about as monumentous as, the interstate highway system, the electrical grid, indoor freaking plumbing. It's a core civilizational foundation on which we'll be building the next generation's wealth. Yeah? Now, governments and municipalities, they move slowly, but each home can move very quickly to invest in this transition. They can invest today if they want, right? Governments, they got to go through this whole process. But, those investments will make more sense as, residential energy solutions scale. Part of that is going to be a function of the incentives and the speed at which that transition can be accomplished. Anyway, I thought that was quite interesting. Wanted to share. The next one, also very interesting. This is Solar Power World reporting on an historical residence that is implementing solar to more fully realize the vision of its creator. It's pretty cool. Let's read it. Quote, Frank Lloyd Wright's architectural masterpiece, Fallingwater, is now powered by solar energy. The Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, which owns the historic property, partnered with Outcue Energy and Pennsylvania-based solar installer Groundhog Solar to construct a 540 panel ground mount solar installation using bifacial panels on a meadow adjacent to the Fallingwater home. The array will offset 100% of the electricity used by Fallingwater's main and guest houses both. And quote, this is very interesting because they aren't putting the panels on the structure. And I mean, you think about this, this is probably the very best way to honor the original vision, right? I mean, just don't modify the structure at all. So this property has the good fortune to be on a few acres of land. This isn't going to be a possibility for all properties, but it is a great way to honor the original intent of the home. One problem, from my perspective anyway, there's no batteries. So why not, right? I mean, I would guess that maybe it's because the home is no longer occupied as a residence, right? It's just a conservancy. So energy security isn't going to be part of that calculus. I would also think that, solar isn't common in this part of Pennsylvania, so it's unlikely that the grid is significantly stressed. And that this, particular installation is not going to be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. But it'd be better with batteries, By the by, it's very cool to see this. Very cool to remind ourselves that residential solar doesn't have to be rooftop solar. It's just, the first thing we think of. If you happen to have a bit of land, it may make way more sense to put the solar array in an adjacent field rather than to put it onto your house. If any of you have gone this route, it'd be cool to hear from you, hear your thought process, maybe the cost increases or decreases associated with the decision. So comment below. We'd love to hear from you. All right, next, we've got a story from NBC News. They report on a Mississippi homeowner without net metering. Let's read it. Quote, They were talking about the solar credits, the net metering credits specifically. Well, not net metering, just the energy they send back to the grid, those credits. Those credits also showed up on their electricity bill, helping to cut their average monthly payment by $11. That's in addition to the $250 or so that they saved during peak summer months by using solar power themselves. But eventually, the Krells, subject to this article, began to question the value of the credits. You know, $11, it's not a lot, right? The Krells learned that Mississippi regulations allowed utility companies to buy roof-generated solar power at a small fraction of the retail rate they charged to deliver that power back to customers' homes. The Krells talked to rooftop solar owners in other states where more generous compensation rules allowed them to offset their entire electricity bills, end quote, aka net metering, right? Now, first of all, Mississippi barely has any solar adoption, and straight up, demand incentive might be very helpful here. But if this particular customer had put in a battery, rather than essentially using the grid as a battery, they would get the full value of the electricity they generate. So something to think about. It's a further expense. I get that. And I get that it might not make sense for this particular person, but it might be quite interesting to do what they seem to be doing in Rhode Island. I mentioned this way back in episode 7. Rhode Island is incentivizing the purchase of batteries rather than incentivizing the purchase of solar itself. It always comes down to economics, and because electricity is so cheap in Mississippi, you know, there's not a lot of incentive to install residential solar, and certainly no incentive for investing in batteries with their high cost. We can't expect this to change over time as renewables become the clear winner, considering levelized cost of energy. You know, it is absolutely possible that some regions, maybe Mississippi, accomplishes this transition to solar at the grid scale without residential solar batteries. It's just going to take a lot longer. But we'll keep an eye on it over the coming years just to kind of see how this develops. But you can see how the different incentives and the different market forces are essentially holding Mississippi back, you know, from adopting solar, which is a bit of a shame because they make a lot of solar energy in Mississippi. They're down in the Sun Belt. All right, next up, we've got an article from Electrek. They report on ConsumerAffairs poll of Americans and their feelings about rooftop solar and how that relates to their home values. So let's read this. Quote, St. Petersburg, Florida, and Knoxville, Tennessee saw the two largest percentage increases in home sale prices for putting solar panels on roofs. Homeowners with solar in those two cities were able to sell for a staggering 160% and 150% more than others, respectively. California, which is regularly at the forefront of green initiatives and legislation, had 11 of the top 75 cities with the highest price increases in clean energy home sales. New York had the highest number of clean energy homes listed for sale. Even the four cities at the very bottom of the percentage value bump, Seattle, Columbus, Ohio, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Anaheim, California, saw a 1% rise in selling price on houses with solar panels, end quote. Now, I'm essentially in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They're right here down the street. And you'll remember that the home assessor that I contacted pointed out to me that he assigned no value to residential solar at the moment. So, all of this depends where you are. It seems clear that places with high electricity rates value solar more than places with lower electricity rates. Probably just makes sense. It could be a matter of sun, right? I barely see you in Seattle. But the most interesting thing to me was the disparity between the top reason for going solar compared with the top reason for not going solar. So let me pull that back up. They list these here. So the number one reason was to benefit the environment. A whopping 60% went solar for environmental reasons. I mean, that's way, way higher than I would expect. I would expect it to be like a knock-on reason at very best. I would expect it to be behind energy security and saving money, you know. And then on the other side of that was reason not to go solar. It was too expensive, 22%, which is my reason, right? But that's just crazy to me. The altruistic argument is moving the needle more than the financial one in both directions, in both the reason to and the reason not. You know, the reason to is a 60% versus just a 20% not. I don't know. It's super interesting to me. I suppose this is true for electric vehicle adoption. I don't know. I guess that makes me more Grinchy than most people because I only care about being cool and about saving money. You know, there's a chart though in this article that shows green home values in the United States by state. Let me pull that up really quickly. There's a couple of interesting things here. First thought from me is that home prices in California are friggin' out of control. Almost $1 million. Oh, it's crazy. But the second thought I have is that I happen to live in a very reasonably priced state. Like basically the bottom of the cost curve. Just above, what is it? Nebraska, Maryland. Oh, and my old stomping grounds, Arkansas. Shout out to my friends in Arkansas. Anyway, it's interesting, tracks with my recent experience, right? But let me know in the comments below if you've gone through purchasing or selling your home with solar. We'd all be interested to see how this study tracks with your particular experience. Now, people's experience that comment on this podcast are probably going to be a leading indicator. You know, this survey was done a bit ago. This is going to be more of a lagging indicator. So anyway, let us know. We would definitely benefit from the knowledge. All right, last one. We've got Green Building Elements outlining the pros and the cons of leasing. Let's read what they've got to say. Quote, they try to define solar panel leasing here. Solar panel leasing is when companies offer customers the chance to lease solar panels instead of buying them outright. As long as you pay off the lease within the agreed upon time frame, you don't need to worry about any additional payments. With this kind of financing, you'll only pay for the energy produced by your solar panels, and if you decide to stop paying, you simply return the equipment to the company. Simple, right? Not simple. Excuse me. This allows you to use the energy created from the solar panels without having to worry about paying maintenance costs. If you find that they aren't fulfilling your wishes enough, you can simply send them back, end quote. Now, this is actually a terrible article. What they describe above is closer to a power purchase agreement, not really a lease. But in both instances, you just don't own the panels ever. So there's no buying them over time. That's not what's happening here. You might remember that power purchase agreements were the primary take-to-market strategy for Solar City. And Tesla, they freaking got rid of those existing agreements and got out of that business as soon as they acquired the Solar City business. A lease explicitly does not retain ownership. It does. A lease explicitly does maintain or retain ownership by a third party. And a lease is different from a power purchase agreement because it doesn't depend on the energy used. So what they were describing, definitely closer to a power purchase agreement. But, you know, if we're looking at it in terms of lease, it's simply going to amortize the expected value of the energy plus a margin of profit over the term of the lease. Ownership never changes hands. You know, the expectation is that the lease provider owns the equipment at the end of the lease, unless you buy it out. So the owner removes the system, potentially redeploys it elsewhere. Are we really thinking that's happening? We'll talk about that more later. I don't know. I don't see that happening. But they go into some pros and cons. So the first pro is lower initial investment. And honestly, this is really the only thing. They go on to list two others, which are no maintenance, but solar is already essentially zero maintenance. So this is not really a pro. And then the other thing they mention is flexible payment terms. But that's really just the first reason, right? So let's go through the cons. So the cons are down here, if I can get past the ads. The first one they list is limited warranty. Now, in a lease, warranty is 100% beside the point. You don't own the system, so you are not responsible for any warranty. The owner is responsible for the warranty, so that's the leaseholder. Anyway, this is kind of bugging me, this article. The next one that they mention is higher overall cost, which we mentioned before. You know, they build in some margin. So obviously this is legit. The company leasing you the equipment is building in margin that you wouldn't have had to pay if you were simply buying the panels yourself. Now, this last one is also pretty legit. This last one is no tax credits, right? No rebates, nothing. Now, this is the same honestly as the previous reason, but it is an additional reason for the higher overall cost, right? If they're building in some margin, you're clearly going to pay a little bit more. Now, they don't mention the most important disadvantage. The most important disadvantage is you don't own the system. And that means selling your property is a pain in the freaking tuchus. Meet Kevin did an awesome video on this, and I think we'll make that this episode's featured video. So to wrap on this article, it's not just a complicated and marginal deal for consumers. It's not great for providers either. The two biggest problems from a provider perspective is they have to front the cost to install, and it's not cheap, especially with labor costs these days. And the other is the difficulty of repossessing it if customers don't pay. What are you going to go tear down their house, or are you going to start unscrewing a solar panel? Like, you can't even get access to their property. It's not your property. You'd be like, all this stuff is just kind of crazy from my perspective. Anyway, let's take a break for a moment. We'll get to the featured video so Kevin can tell us more. So Meet Kevin was originally recommended to me for his real estate investment education. It did not come as a YouTube recommendation. This came from an actual person who was actually trying to get me to think about how I could diversify my income, not just from my job, but also, you know, invest in real estate. It did nicely dovetail with my Tesla interest at the time. I never went into real estate, but I did get heavily into Tesla. That did happen to be completely independent of Meet Kevin, but there was a super interesting thing that he covered that I wanted to make sure that I shared with you guys. And that's this video that he made that runs through what he calls scams, but they're really just lease and power purchase agreement terms. And it's these terms that end up being a problem for homeowners. They just don't know it yet. So let's hear one example.
Scam number 2 is solar companies oftentimes sell these leases or power purchase agreements under the premise that, oh, well, if you need to sell your house, don't worry, we'll just transfer it to the buyer. Well, guess what? I happen to be a real estate broker, and I happen to have to deal with these crappy lease contracts and power purchase agreements all the time. Let me just make this very clear. Your buyer does not want to take your dumb contract for an improvement that was made to help you save money on energy. Here's a perfect example. I was selling a house in Ojai, California, where 2 homeowners were living and working from home and had a spa. They're using about $250 of power per month. For their case, solar made sense. They would have saved money if they stayed there and kept using the panels. The contracts made sense. They don't always have to be bad, even though, yes, I'm being a little bit negative towards them. The reason, though, is when it came time to sell, they were under the impression that it would be easy to transfer to a buyer, but now we get 2 millennial buyers that work for LinkedIn, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, they're barely home, their electricity bill's only like $30 a month, they don't want the contract, and the buyers cancel the deal. This happens more often than you would think. It sounds easy to say, oh, we'll just transfer the panels to the buyers. The problem is most buyers don't understand contracts that previous sellers have entered into, and bottom line is, anytime something gets complicated or abnormal, buyers don't want it. Buyers don't want to inherit your crappy abnormal contracts. They want what's normal. Keep in mind the solar contracts are based on your usage, not necessarily the buyer's usage.
So it gets even more complicated if you try to prepay your contract or if you try to move the panels. I mean, this video honestly is worth a viewing all the way through his list. It's about the first 15 minutes of the video. After that, he gets into some old Tesla solar programs that aren't available anymore. What he makes clear, though, is that purchasing the solar system is the only way. It's the only way, right? Today, I believe Tesla offers financing. Many of you have opted for that. I'm interested in the rate you're paying. Last I heard it was 3%, but things have changed a lot in the last few months with interest rates going up. So I don't know. Let's jump over to the Tesla webpage and let's see what is happening. So if we go over to solar panels, we might be able to check rates, right? So let's hit order now. And some random address. Doesn't matter how much. So solar panels loan. So this is based on a 4.5 APR. I mean, 4.5%. Honestly, that's really not bad. I mean, that's pretty good, you know, to be honest. Most mortgages, I mean, they're going for like 6.5%. I mean, it depends on your credit, of course, but it's not just the interest rate that matters, it's the time frame, you know, so it's still going to be shorter. If you finance the solar purchase, you're only going to be able to spread those payments out over maybe like, I don't know, what does it say in this thing? It says 120 months, so that's what, 10 years? So you wouldn't be able to do it for 30 years, for example, so your payments might end up being twice what they would be per month. Of course, the overall amount you pay is less, but you know, the time value of money is significant. So if you can get into it for less per month, that would still, you know, potentially be preferable. It is still, you know, 10 years, almost twice the amount of time than you can finance a car, for example. I think the highest term I've seen for a car is 6 years, right? 60 months. Anyway, I don't know. Just let me know how all of this stacks up for you. Does it make a lot of sense? Am I still onto something with, you know, the renovation mortgages? I don't know. Something to think about. I'll definitely be thinking about it a lot. All right, so let's take a look at production. I just need to get the unit streaming here, but let's get ready for it when it pops up. I know it's got a still screen from earlier, but there we go, which is awesome. So we're at the longest days of the year. Let's look at this on a day-to-day basis. So we're solidly in the 70. Again, it just rolled over days, but our production numbers are solidly in the 70s. It's been a very mild summer. Plenty of cloud cover is cutting into production. If we go back just a couple of days, you can see this 30 kilowatt hour day. It's pretty paltry, but the overall month to date, surprisingly, is tracking pretty close to last year. We're right now at almost 900 kilowatt hours. We're about halfway through June. So might ultimately end up being about 1,800 kilowatt hours by the end of the month. Last year, if we go way back to June, we did 1,800 kilowatt hours of solar generation. Yeah, so we're on track actually to beat that, even though it's a mild summer. Man, that's pretty interesting. Going over to the brother-in-law's traditional solar system, he is ahead of our solar production. He's across the 900 kilowatt hour mark. Kind of amazing, though, how closely they track. I would just expect, you know, especially during this time of year with the days being longer, since he's got more capacity, he should be able to generate more than us, but it's still tracking pretty closely. So with the new variable speed pool pump and the milder weather, we've been keeping our consumption down very significantly. So last June, so we're still in June 2021, we can see that our home usage of electricity was 2,317 kilowatt hours. And we're tracking to use just about half that this year, which is pretty crazy. We've used, let's go back up to today, see what we've used. Should be something in the 600s. Can't go too fast or the scroll doesn't work for me. There we go, June. Yeah, so we're almost at 700 kilowatt hours. So that might come up to something like 1,400 kilowatt hours if we can keep the AC off. Actually, we just lost that battle because we just turned that back on. But it's maximizing savings. we're still waiting for PTO, so we still don't have net metering. So a little bit of a tragedy from that perspective. Now, we did have something interesting happen with my experience with the Tesla team. I had a bit of a text chat with one of my Tesla contacts yesterday. I wanted to know what happens when people change their orders. You know, it's come up a couple of times. What happens after the permits are pulled and the utility applications are submitted? And you know what? He confirmed that there is an internal process for updating drawings, but crucially, there is not a process for updating town permits or utility interconnect applications. So, I mean, sucks for me. It's put me in PTO purgatory, as you know, but it's also biting others that make changes to their orders along the way. I mean, some interesting takeaways, just in my personal experience. If I had just gone with the Tesla recommended system of 13.5 kilowatt solar roof and 3 Powerwalls, I'd be a much happier person right now. Instead, I killed all the Powerwalls to save money until I learned that I need at least one Powerwall to keep the power on if the grid goes down. And then I added a second Powerwall when I learned that the single Powerwall requires a sub-panel with only critical loads, which doesn't include AC, and that complicates the whole install and complicates the power failover process. So now, honestly, I just wish I'd gone with the originally suggested 3 and maybe even up to 4. I don't know. It depends. But overall, lesson learned, right? Led me to doing the podcast. Winning. I'll eventually stop using the batteries, you know, straight up. When I do get PTO, I'll be able to use the grid as a battery because I've got net metering in my area. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to be draining those Powerwalls every day. So if I go back to just using my Powerwalls as backup, the hope is that they'll last longer than their 10-year warranty. You know, mostly because I'm not cycling them every day, you know, like I've been doing while I wait for PTO. So if I were to lose net metering, you know, just looking at this, you know, from the other perspective, I could see how it would be in my interest to have more battery. And, you know, that's really another reason why net metering probably will have to die ultimately. It's messing with consumer incentives, including this guy's. So anyway, that'll do it for episode 59 of the Tesla Power Podcast. Thanks for sticking with me. Please use my referral code. It is going to save you $300 on solar roofs and $300 on solar panels. You can go to ts.la/62310 to place your order. I'm Aaron Brady, your Tesla residential energy community organizer. Let's do it again on the next video.